Welcome to Days Roundtable 13. The paradigm is ending. What comes next? These were inspired by the two-volume book, The Valediction, by husband and wife co-authors Paul Fitzgerald and Elizabeth Gould. They have developed a plan for world peace that can be found at valediction.net. That's valediction.net. Just click World Peace on the top banner. Paul and Liz are going to get us up to speed about that plan, and then we want everyone to participate with questions and suggestions about how to make peace the foundation for life on this planet. But before that, first, I'd like to introduce our host and invite any opening comments from Chris Milligan, publisher of Day Books.
Hello, and thanks everybody for attending here and continuing on this journey for peace. Ever since they started sending pictures from outer space and showing us that, you know, this nice little ball that we live in, it really is just one world, okay? And we need to learn to live together. We have some fail-safe devices, all of us together as a society. The first one is basically the basic dialectic. I call it the dark hallway. You go down the hallway, you bump into one side, after a while you bump into the other side. I find where this can be manipulated. The next fail-safe device that we have all together as a people is the cycle of generations. And a very good book called The History of America's Future, okay, generations. And it talks about that there's basically 4 generations that go through history, and that you have an idealistic generation, and then you have a reactive generation that reacts to some of the things that the idealists put out there. And then you have a civics generation, and then you have an adaptive generation, and then it starts all over again with this cycle. And like, you know, there's wheels within wheels, and we have these cycles that us as people, us as societies, us as a world have gone through for millennia. Okay, and as Kent talked about in his books, he's seeing the end of a big 26,000 year cycle and the beginning of another 26,000 cycle. And then within these larger cycles, we have smaller ones where you do have rising and falling of empires and of ideas and of people. We've been talking about for a long time about that we're coming to this change, a paradigm change, okay? And the interesting thing is that the next idealistic generation, okay, you know, we had the greatest generation, the GI generation, the silent generation, the boomer generation, Generation X, Generation Y, which is also known as the millennials, then Z, and now being born is what they're calling Generation Alpha, and they're the next idealists, and they basically say they started around 2012, 2015. So we are at a change period here, and I hope it goes for the better. Amen.
Okay, well, I guess this is just a quick overview to get you to see the lineup as it's been laid out. You know, we've been doing these roundtables, and in each roundtable for the last year, especially in the last 8 roundtables, we've been laying out the organizational structure that actually became the World Peace Proposal. And so what I just want to do right now is to just give you, you know, the basics of the proposal, because we feel that we have created something to a stage, and it definitely needs to go to the next stage. And that requires, you know, new thinking and new input. And we know everyone is going to bring something different to it. And we know that there are other important aspects that we really have to get in, that we don't have the expertise to bring those aspects in. But what we're thinking about is something that requires and the ability for us to think outside of our limitations, and that's why you're here to help us. So in chapter 1 of the proposal, we were dealing with the Fitzgerald myth and history embodied in JFK's life and death. And the reason that we started with that and felt that that was really the foundation and the most important is because we really came to see the tragedy, actually, of the singular focus on JFK seeming to be who killed him, who's behind it, who can we hold accountable? And we went through all of that. And this was a feeling we had even before we got involved deeply, with the idea of creating this world peace proposal, or the concept of trying to bring a concept to Newgrange. And so it just fell into place very naturally, especially when it went into the mythology and really saw the connections of the feeling of the people who actually were alive 1,000 years ago, and some of the people who are being focused on today, and seeing that there are people who actually are carrying the mission of people 1,000 years ago. And that never seemed to be a factor that was ever brought up or talked about in terms of the JFK assassination. And we feel that's a very important component too. And the next chapter was our own personal experience in the Hair musical, because that's where we really connected to what we felt was, as Chris would say, the power of our generation. It was being expressed for us. And Hair was this amazing year experience where we were able to feel that as young people just coming out in the world, college, we were in college, the Vietnam War was clearly a rallying point for all of us. We were absolutely, determined to end the war. And of course, when Paul got involved with Hair and I became involved through that, the reality that we felt empowered. We felt we really were making a difference. But once again, as we matured and reached a point, especially in, I think it was 2016, and discovered that the actual peace movement, something happened. It actually was derailed in some way. It was as if the absolute reality we knew existed in the 1960s through the experience, through the Hair experience. We knew then but it would have been 1970, that there was something that seemed to disappear, as if, and we never really knew what happened. And finally in 2016, we began to do research that ended up cluing us into movements, underground movements, that were coming out of the intelligence and the CIA, that were really far more involved in micromanaging the peace movement than we ever could have imagined. And I think the reason in particular that we were convinced that we were effective was because the war seemed to end, and even the draft ended. Well, to be honest with you, I never realized what it meant that when we went to basically, no draft, that did not mean no war. It really never crossed my mind in my early 20s. And as I was, protesting against the war, and thought that the end of the draft was a good thing. So this became a reality that then it was completely fulfilled by the experience, and particularly the music. And one of the things that we felt was so profound was the finale song of Hair, which really, if you go and listen to it today, I feel that song is exactly where we are right now. If you actually look at the words and read the words and actually hear the tone of the singing coming from the kids, especially back then when we were really involved with the anti-war movement. So that experience is what we really want to bring it back. We want to finish the job we started, and that's part of what we're trying to do. Now, the next chapter was when we talk about the mysticism that brought us to Newgrange. And the reason that became important to us was because in our experience, we had discovered that journalism took us in one direction, and it basically led us at some point to a dead end. And what we discovered was that this thing called mysticism and this other way of knowing what's going on suddenly became the only answer that we could follow. And so part of our experience was beginning to recognize mystical experiences as they were unfolding before our eyes. And I think every single person, if you open up to it that way, that is exactly what you're going to start seeing. So when we began to connect with the mysticism of the Irish, the myths and the Irish family, when we went back to Ireland and we were introduced to this place called Newgrange by a Fitzgerald at the airport, you know, this is the kind of thing, this is just one of thousands of little incidents like that. But that's my point to everybody. You have to begin to actually really enliven yourself to recognizing when these things are going on around you. And then I think that's how it becomes empowered. And the next chapter is when we bring in our Afghan experience. Our original experience was basically covering the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan as the first American journalist who went in 1981 for CBS News, and we got all caught up in the intensity of discovering the narrative creation process of the mainstream media really was not dealing with what we had come to understand was the real story about the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. And so that's what really opened our eyes to another way of knowing and led us through mysticism. And now we're going back also to recognize the very special connection we made to Afghanistan and how much it became a part of our story and our lives. And Bachir Han really is an embodiment of the power of opening up to a new way of knowing. And what his peace movement actually connected to was an entirely different way of understanding how to create genuine peace. And when that chapter really lays out the differences between Bachir Han and Gandhi, and you really begin to recognize that there is an intentional, basically Bachir Han's been almost written out of history. And when you understand the reason he was written out of history is because his peace movement could have been far more successful than Gandhi, quite honestly. And I think when you look at the chapter, it lays out the reasons why, and it's very real. Now we connect back to JFK and his plan for world peace when he laid out his American University speech. And there are many, many other examples of his efforts towards peace, but the speech really is a perfect embodiment of understanding exactly what Bachir Han understood, which was that the peace has to start from within us. And he was really talking to Americans and saying, you have to open up your own ideas about what the Soviets are and who they are and how to interact with them. You have to start the process, okay? And that potentially can change everything. And that is exactly part of the plan, a part of what Bachir Han's plan was to basically remove the intensity of the violence that became entrenched in the Afghans who were living under British rule, and the intensity of the bloodlust that really was connected to their code of life, the Pashtunwali, and the way that they were able to embrace the peace movement. So we felt that there was a natural bond between JFK and what he was trying to do, and Bachir Han and what he was trying to do. So there's an empowerment there. And our final chapter before the epilogue is an incredibly important part of this. And this is what we identified, the thing that JFK was trying to help Americans understand about themselves and how they had to step back and open up to a new way of viewing the world and other people and other cultures, especially the Soviet Union. And the reason really can be embodied in the way that the Hegelian dialectic really became a process of basically being able to constantly reduce everything down to them against us, good and evil. And this is kind of where we are right now in the world, but it's not the first time we've been in this place. Obviously, JFK was dealing with it big time, and we know that that's what he was trying to address in the American University speech. was the tendency to want to vilify and create out of the Soviet Union the ultimate enemy and the ultimate evil. And that was something obviously that was present back then, and it's present now, so it really needs to be understood. And why we included Seema Wali as our epilogue, partly because unfortunately Seema died in 2017, and it was a great tragic loss because for us she was the embodiment of Afghanistan, and her dying was a kind of hint to us that we knew Afghanistan was dying too. And of course that's kind of where it is right now. But what she wrote for us in our introduction really is the voice of the victim of the Hegelian dialectic, the thinking that came out of Washington that's still very present with what today is referred to as the neocons. This is exactly what the neocon agenda is, which is basically to constantly create a tension that constantly cannot be resolved because you have so vilified the other that you're now dealing with evil. And once you're dealing with evil, you must eradicate it. And that's kind of where we are right now. Okay, so that lays out the chapters. And the reason I really wanted to give you a reminder of them, especially from our personal perspective, is that's what we have created. This is very personal for us. And we know that it needs structural things beyond this to really give it the kind of structure that we can go out with, okay, and really engage other people who might appreciate the personal aspects of this, but the structural things still need to be there. So I open it up, and I hope that you will let us know what you think.
That's all of us. I'll say this, and to maybe get the thing rolling. JFK's June 10th, 1963, quote unquote, peace speech, he says a lot of very tangible steps that could coax many people to the table, specifically world leaders from different countries, in addition to challenging Americans to examine in their own hearts peace. Paul and Liz, do you intend to, I guess, teach those steps, explicate those steps as a starting point or a starting ramp for everyone's heads to start thinking about how do we negotiate with someone that has been demonized in our hearts and minds?
I think that I recently read Don Jacobs, who's one of the people I've been communicating with. He's a gentleman who works a lot with Native Americans, and he has a lot of work on indigenous peace building. And this is the kind of thing that, that anybody who has not lived in this kind of indigenous way, okay, can learn from this about the difference between viewing the land and viewing your relationship to it and other people from a certain perspective. If you live your entire existence really connected in that more consciously profound way to the land, you think differently. And so we have to accept that. None of us has lived that way, even though we may all be different in the way we deal with these things, that there is still a level at which we are affected by this disconnect. And so that, I think, at least if we can become conscious, I think that's the first step. You have to become conscious that you have certain pre-existing, structures that are in you. Some of those structures are part of the life you're in now, but some of them, plenty of them, could come from your DNA, the structural things that really come through the DNA. So your tendencies and your natural attractions and alignments and this kind of thing. So not all of them, might be something that you're aware of, and they may influence you in ways. So that would be my first recommendation, would be, I think, and that's something that we actually have. Don sent me a wonderful file of some of the things that he's done on that work, and we could make that available. It's an excellent.
Well, does he have a website? Is he published?
Yeah.
Has he written books on this kind of stuff?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, he's
Okay.
He works all the
Don
time.
Jacobs, great. Okay.
Yep, I can make that available. So
Yeah.
That would be my first suggestion.
I think it's important on an individual basis to understand when you go out and you get in your car and you turn the key on and you drive down the street, you are aware of the fact that you're responsible for where that car goes. You have to stop, you have to look around, you have to be aware at all times of the things that are happening. And when you're in extraordinary circumstances, if you're in a storm or if it's a snowy day, I know that wouldn't apply to some of our California friends, but when it's a snowy day and it's snowing a lot around here, you know, we live on a very busy street and our kids learned, you know, how to, fortunately, you know, to avoid accidents because it's very hard to even get out of our driveway at some point. So I'm just taking this down to, you know, a personal place where everyone has to be aware of the fact that they too are responsible for the world we're living in and for the actions of our government, not just to vote for somebody, but to actually be responsible and to understand what the meaning of those votes is, who those people are, what they stand for, who are the people behind them, do they carry agendas? Are they truly innocent? They are certainly the parties that they are, you know, aspiring to become representative of are not innocent. They are very, very involved with an ongoing agenda. They all have aspects of that. Piece by piece, it gets put together, cobbled together into this very messy thing called the US government. But of the 95% of the people who vote, mostly the fact is that those votes are never recognized. Those votes are very often just simply ignored. The people behind the agenda move their candidates forward like pieces on a chessboard and then go about doing what they've always done before. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, how come the people we elected didn't live up to what they promised? Again and again and again and again and again. And it becomes kind of a mantra. We say, well, that's politics. Well, that's just the way things are. Well, that's just reality. I mean, what do they say about, you know, how did someone become a neocon? Okay, it was a liberal who was mugged by reality, I believe is one of the expressions, okay? Well, the fact is that we have to be aware of the reality. You know, I came to think at one point, maybe 20 years ago, that America was much more a theme park than it was a democracy. And the fact is that the theme was democracy, but it was just a theme. We didn't really participate. We didn't really get out there. I mean, for those Americans who fought in America's wars and went out there and put their lives on the line to stand for what they believed was what their country stood for, that they certainly took a step into the reality and came back in many cases that with a much larger respect for what it was. I mean, my father was in World War II. He got drafted at the age of 35 with a wife and 3 kids at home. He had to go off for almost 2 years and wound up being plunked into the Battle of the Bulge as a pharmacist working in a military hospital. So his worldview was changed overnight. He came back and I would ask him about it. We would sit there. I was born after the war. We would sit there when he would come home from his drugstore and we would watch war movies together. And he would say, it wasn't like that at all. It really wasn't. And I got that lesson from him. And it was just a kind of slow wisdom. He was an adult. He wasn't a child when he was drafted. He was an adult with a family and a career. And so he was able to take that and put that in perspective. And he helped me put that into perspective for my own life and what that really meant. And it made my analysis different from my peers growing up.
I want to read a comment that Alana put in the chat to your point, Paul, about how our elected people don't do what they say. Alana wrote, the new president of Costa Rica said he would be murdered if he did what he said he was going to do in his campaign promises.
Oh, boy, yeah,
Right to your point.
right. Well,
it's
Now we're
called
asking,
courage.
Now we're asking, this was a conversation I had this morning with a colleague who's in Costa Rica. He had the president had said he would reveal what the secretive contracts were with Big Pharma regarding the vaccinations. And also he said he would not mandate vaccinations, but he's just now mandated them for everybody for 6-month-olds. And so she's horrified. And I said, ask them, develop a group of people to press on him about the details. Who would murder him? Why would they murder him? How does he know that? To dig deeper into that statement that he made.
Right. It's
To Chris's point about courage, you know, you
Well,
say you're going to do some things on the campaign trail, and
It
by
was
golly,
courageous for him though to say that he would be murdered.
Right.
Usually
Right.
he has that pressure.
right.
well, that too.
You know that at that time, it was revealed that Pfizer had rather systematically formed agreements with a number of South America. You know, each one had a confidentiality clause, and so it required a whistleblower to take a huge risk to reveal, for example, that Pfizer had an agreement with Brazil with one of these confidentiality clauses. And I don't know the circumstances in Africa, but there were 4 African national leaders who died rather mysteriously after coming out against the vaccines.
That's right.
Right. Well, there's nothing like that to obviously set the tone. And I think one of the reasons, to be honest with you all, that we are focused on peace, which in itself can be very controversial when you're dealing with warmongers who see that as a threat. So I'm not trying to say that trying to push for world peace in and of itself guarantees that you know our process, the things we're trying to do, may not be targeted at a point. But I think that is the whole point about creating something that more people can be attracted to, because we need to all protect each other from this abuse of power. The only thing that's going to stop them is going to be enough people have to be there. I always felt that if anyone remembers the film Witness, it was a film about the Amish country and the detective who ends up having to live there because he's found corruption in New York City, and it basically is the highest guy, you know, in the police department who's the corrupt one. And in order to save his life, he ends up in Amish country, protected by them. And at the end of the film, when the bad guy finally finds him, and he's going to get him and he's going to kill him, the only thing that saves him is the fact that the bell rings and all the farmers and all the people come to the field, and he simply can't kill everyone. And I really think that is exactly where we are, that we must motivate people, and we cannot be separated by our petty differences anymore.
Well,
It's completely being used against us.
there is a psychological process at work here that is inhibiting us from solving these problems. I mean, everyone wants a Messiah. And it's this Messiah's job to self-empower, to get people to believe in their own power and to unite as a group. And that is what in order to move the basic idea forward, instead of laying it all on the Messiah and then ultimately crucifying the Messiah. And you've just talked about 4 individual politicians who were, you know, quite willing to play the Messiah and you know, were crucified for their role in it. The fact is that part of the role of that Messiah is to get people to motivate themselves. Okay, I've been saying to Liz for years, it's time for Christ to get off the cross and for people to start working towards doing the things that Christ would want them to do. And that is self-empowerment, whether male or female. That is what needs to be done. And I think, you know, I think peace is a wonderful platform with which to start. Say, does it work for peace? Does that criticism work in terms of helping me, or is it just satisfying your need to criticize somebody for something? So this is, you know, yes.
No.
Go ahead.
God doesn't want to be worshiped. He just wants a place at the table.
There you go.
Trying to do books.
Marty.
Yeah. I in 2006 had a business plan done at the Monterey Institute of International Studies, and it was about doing this think tank. But the thrust of it all was peace being profitable. And I was one of 6 business plans done before the business school was ended with Middlebury took over Ms. But I'm getting calls now from professors going, we've got to start talking about peace being profitable. We're sick of talking about war to our soldiers and stuff. And I mean, I think we need to start shifting our topic. I have 2 sons, and my one son is very, very smart. He's a writer, and they're both deaf. And so he starts writing this book, and suddenly he gets 2,000 people a month listening, and then it goes to 60,000 people a month listening. And I will tell you, if you link into anything that goes through a deaf community, it goes so fast around the world. I mean, honestly.
That'd be a great thing
Wow.
to discover. Alana, you waved, and Wendell, I see you've got your hand up. So ladies first, Alana.
I wanted to share a quick anecdote about this alpha generation, and it's the first time I heard of that phrase, alpha generation, born in 2012, I think he said. My 2-year-old granddaughter, my daughter tells me they went to a beautiful lake, and this little 2-year-old walks into the lake, puts up her arms and says, "I come in peace." and my daughter asked her, where did you get that phrase? Where did you, and she had nothing to say about it, just came through her. And then the other one is my soon to be 7-year-old granddaughter was here the other day, and she's just playing around, and she says, "There should be no war. There should be peace.
Yes.
There should be peace in all the world for all the people." And that just channeled through her like that too.
Right. Well, I do have a little point to make here. I came up with this line because I really think we have to have something to summarize this in a way that everyone gets it, and you've got to choose which side. There's only 2 sides. I'll use the dialectic for this one, right? Okay. You can either be with the bankers or the people. That's it. That's your choice. And we know that the bankers are the only ones who benefit from war, and the people are the only ones who benefit from peace. But I think there's a lot more of us than them. So I think we better start, moving.
I think my fellow Fitzgerald has something to say. Wendell?
Yeah, hi. This is the first time I've encountered you, Paul, so we must be related somewhere.
Somewhere along the line. Well, we look a lot alike, I can see.
Yeah, 2 handsome bald guys. What can you say? And when I read the piece in your books about Newgrange, I have visited Newgrange and walked all the way to Intuit. That as you know, I think you spoke about it in your books, and they'll turn on a light that is essentially the same light that comes all the way through naturally on what is it? It's the solstice, the winter solstice.
Winter solstice.
And what an amazing thing that place that is. But my interest has always been regarding the peace movement is that the saying captures that in no justice, no peace. And so back in the early 70s, which is actually this year is the 50th year of that. I was introduced to the idea of economic justice. Somewhere along the line, I met Alana, and she and I became colleagues in that regard. What we learned along the way about the mechanism that allows the wealthy to exploit everybody. There is a mechanism which allows the wealthy and those who have the privilege of it to siphon wealth upward to them and out of the hands and out of the pockets of ordinary people. And merely speaking about it, you scare the crap out of the elites, and because their main purpose is to protect their privileges to exploit everybody else.
Do you have a book or some reference you could share with us to get someone up to speed with that very specifically?
Oh, heck yes. Back in the 19th century, a guy named Henry George, an American political economist, wrote a book called Progress and Poverty. And he self-published it in 1879, and then it went on to become a worldwide bestseller. It outsold the Bible apparently in those years, early years.
Oh, wow.
And he asks the question, it's called, the title is Progress and Poverty. The question is, how come there's so much poverty amid so much progress? The observation of the time was there shouldn't be any poverty because we can produce as much and certainly more than we need and want. But that did not, that technology, that progress didn't solve the problem. And it turns out that progress has in it seeds of its own destruction and exploitation. And so it's a 500-page book. It's a bit of a read. It's a difficult piece. I've got a YouTube channel. I'll give you the link to it, where I put in something like 8 or 9 short videos where I talk about it some.
What's the name of your YouTube? What's your YouTube channel, Wendell?
It's Our Earth Home.
Yeah, I just want to ask Paul and Liz about this idea. As Wendell was describing that, specifically economic justice, specifically no justice, no peace, I pictured the peace we want to discuss in this roundtable and create going forward as a car. And economic justice, what Wendell just described, could be one fine wheel of that car. If you had to name 3 other wheels, maybe we can't do it off the top of our head, but what are the wheels we want to put this peace car on? I think it's undeniable that the economic justice could certainly be one of them.
I have an idea that I think is connected to what you're talking about. I do think that when you remove the war economy, you solve so many problems. It doesn't solve everything, but you remove one of the fundamental problems. The whole idea of the Jubilee year, for instance, was clearly built. I don't believe it was just built to solve the problem of every economy ends up in deficit. I think war has a special burden on every economy. And when you remove that component from the economy, many of the problems I think that we're experiencing is the corruption of the war economy. And now we're looking at the war having been literally everything's now being weaponized. Okay, so that the war has spread. You have a war mentality. I think I remember a while ago reading an article from somebody from MIT who was describing some new cancer treatment. And they were describing how it was going to attack those evil things in your body effectively. So to me, that is really part of a mentality. So it creeps into everything. So that way, if we start with the foundation of war itself, then see what's left that we might have to deal with. I mean, I don't think that it's going to be the same without a war economy. And, putting it back into the realm of true defense, okay, because we know what the problem is. This is not, this is not defense. This is absolutely not defense. Just like our bodies, we have to have defenses, but when it turns into leukemia, we know the difference, between a defense and, and blood disease. And I think that's what we really have. The economy has really got a blood disease.
I think what Liz is saying is a big part of the problem. It's just that we've got language all over the place in terms of what is really being done and being said. And it's very confusing isn't the word for it. I mean, it's just we're living in kind of an upside down backwards kaleidoscope where anything we keep getting fed and played, and what's the next big thing we have to sign on to in order to be a legitimate citizen, and it's getting worse. It's not getting any better. So,
and while Liz was describing that, it occurred to me, we can instantly think in those terms, warlike terms, because so much is presented as an enemy. So much is presented, that's the thing we have to fear, the thing we have to fight. The thing we have to fear and the thing we have to fight. The thing we have to fear and the thing we have to fight.
the dialectic.
Right.
Yeah. And if we could put one yellow sticky, in front and hold it all day long. It's to try to start to hear that, because Liz and Paul have said a great step, if not the only first step, is to end the war inside of us, this knee jerk. So just trying to grab some principles here of how to calm ourselves down, end the war inside of us. Alana, yes.
I think probably my sense is everybody on this call has done a lot of inner work to heal themselves, to meditate, to align themselves with the higher good. And so there are a lot of us who have been doing for decades that inner healing process. So I see a great need for those of us who've done that inner work to get some clarity about now what must be done on the outside in the structures of the world, in the structures of our economy, in the structures of our tax system, how our government is structured, so that we can be the force for the outer peace. And many of us, I feel tremendous happiness and peace and gratitude every day. And my sadness is the state of the world. That's the one thing I would change that makes me grossly unhappy. And I suspect that's true of most everybody on this call.
Yeah.
The other challenges with the values is with intellectuals overall who talk, and they just are not activists. It's more than thinking great thoughts. It's more than getting clarity even. It takes a leadership role to be out there connecting with people, working to create positive change in the structures that are so inequitable. Now, I know that Paul and Liz do not like the Hegelian dialectic. I never had a bad taste about it before, because thesis antithesis leads to synthesis. And I see it like if you have a thesis antithesis Republican Democrat, that means, hey, let's break out of both and leave both behind. There's something beyond Democrat Republican. Thesis antithesis is the community versus the individual. It shouldn't have to be versus the community. It should be a harmonic, a synthesis of the individual and society. So it's neither right nor left. It's neither communism nor the capitalism we have. It's a combination of fairness and freedom. We need to see we can have an economy that's out of the box, that has maximum freedom and maximum fairness, that arrives at a point of profound peace and unity, out of unity consciousness, but including the diversity. You mentioned the indigenous people earlier, and they coined this term to understand the consciousness of the European that was betraying them and lying. And they saw the European men beating their wives and their children in those early days. And they say, how could people beat their wives and children? Because of course, the women's circle, there was great respect and balance between men and women, and they had greatly honored the children and the elders. So they came up with this term, Wetiko. And so Wetiko really is like the very divided consciousness that sees the separateness of it all. Mm-hmm. And so moving them from Wetiko to unity consciousness as reflected in the outer structures for peace and justice. So I kind of think Hegel's not all that bad.
No. I would agree with you. It isn't so much. It's the way Hegel's been used. And clearly, but when you remove the war motivation from everything, everything can be revisited. But look, remember, Roger Fisher, he was fantastic in his understanding of how to bring dialogue and peaceful resolution, getting ES, okay? And one of the things he used to point out, he said, if you're in a fight, crockery can become a weapon. So anything can be weaponized if you're in a fight. That's my point, Alana. It isn't just that. But it has been to the advantage of the neocons, and they have run with it for 100 years.
The thing is, Roger was a very good guy, and he thought this through, and he had a lot of experience doing it. And he was a World War II veteran as well. And we took him to Afghanistan in 1980. He worked for Curtis. He was Curtis LeMay's weatherman, bombs away LeMay's weatherman. Yeah. And we took him to Afghanistan with us, and he sat down with the president of Afghanistan, with the prime minister of Afghanistan, and with the Soviets to find out how to get the Russians out of Afghanistan. And so when he came up against a wall when he got back to this country. The media stopped him. He was basically, they put him up against people who had no understanding or knowledge of what was going on or
No, they were
negotiation.
Soviet dissidents.
So I asked him after that experience, I said, Roger, what do you do? How do you get to yes when one of the sides doesn't want to get to yes? And he just shook his head. He said, I don't have an answer for that.
Yeah.
So, and the fact is that, he was very frustrated by it, and the media proceeded to demonize him because he was sympathetic to both sides in the argument. And the fact that, claiming that the Soviets at the time had a reason why that needed to be understood for why they were in Afghanistan. So, I mean, these are the kinds of things. And once again, it happened, it got shuffled aside, and then we moved on to the next agenda, okay? Which is the same argument again and again. So there's where the dialectic gets put into play, but not for a good reason.
Right.
It gets put into play in order to maintain a system that is corrupted and going to the wrong place,
Well, I
taking
think
us all there very quickly.
our economy, needless to say, is basically a war economy. The bulk of the, the authorization for defense spending is what, close to $1 trillion now. The amount of money that's being poured into the Ukraine, and the roads and the bridges and the schools and all the other, infrastructure redevelopment will never happen. Okay, so we know that it's sucking everything dry. So, but that's my point though, Alana and Wendell, about, I think that if we focus on that, the war mentality being a major part of a problem that we can't even determine what it will look like if we actually get. See, I think what we're living on is a war platform. And I think that's why I'm saying we need a peace platform. The war is not going to just go away. It just won't be dominant anymore. And it can't be. It cannot provide the correct balance. War is, I think of war really not in terms of war per se, but it's light and dark. Okay, we're dealing with the polarity, and that's where the dialectic comes in. But this is a very imbalanced polarity where the war is in control of everything, and now everything has been weaponized.
And
So
not
that's why we got to
to,
flip it.
speaking of flipping, I see Ruth has her hand up.
Hi.
Ruth, hi.
Hi, I had a very intense experience. I had people over to dinner, and I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and we got into talking about Russia. I felt like I had been saying something, and I was cut off, and I decided that I wasn't going to stop saying what I wanted to say. And what happened was I got into war. I was talking, and he was talking, and he insisted on his saying what he had to say. He did not want to hear what I had to say. And I was shocked because I think that I've always been the one that's deferred. And so I never really understood that if I stood up for what I was in the process of saying, that I was going to be steamrollered like that. And so I had this experience of the fact that there are people that do not want to hear, that do not want to listen. And I'm beginning to think, there's something about consciousness that if you stop giving them energy, that it begins to destroy itself. It begins to, like the Roman Empire, it begins to fall down upon itself. For me, I've been understanding that what I have to focus on is anybody that can listen, anybody that has ears, and training and teaching myself, teaching others to really learn how to be centered, to say what you mean, to be able to have a dialogue with even anybody. It's like so hard to have an awake conversation. I feel as though I'm in the baby steps of really learning how to be powerful and how to listen at the same time and how to take somebody in. I feel like there's these trainings that have to happen for me and perhaps for people that are wanting peace. And that's like a first step.
I totally agree with everything you're saying, Ruth, that this is all part of, I think, what I have come to learn And especially, we learned this a long time ago because, we were dealing with a story with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan that became Charlie Wilson's War. And there is not, very few people, beyond, academics, and people that really have studied the issue in any meaningful way understand that Charlie Wilson's War basically is what most Americans think of is the true story about Afghanistan and the Soviet invasion and America's role in it. They really don't understand that it is literally the propaganda story. And that's what Hollywood puts out. Sometimes there are true aspects in it, and I like to say to people, Charlie Wilson's War is a level of truth. It's the propaganda truth. They did put out that propaganda story, and that's the one they made into the film that would affect the most people around the world. So that became the narrative, the dominant narrative, you see, and that's what we've been trailing is this narrative creation process.
Exactly.
And the best way to deal with that is to create a better narrative. And that's what we're trying to do. And that's the foundation of our narrative is our books and our story about our experience, but building off of that, this idea of a peace platform, understanding that people basically don't really want war. It's unnatural. People have been literally hypnotized and programmed into it. In some ways, they have been bribed into it. There are a lot of people who benefit financially for giving over their secrets to the, to the CIA or to, MK Ultra or whatever, project they want to develop to control people. But really, if you really give people an alternative against war, to not go to war, they will do that.
The mechanisms that enrich the wealthy give them an unearned income. The proposal made over 100 years ago was to shift all taxation onto unearned income. That was talked about by Henry George was the profits and the income that came from ownership of land, private ownership of land. The money that comes, the income that comes from that is completely unearned. And even economists today understand that. There are several other mechanisms of unearned income. And we, those of us who follow this argument, think that unearned income is at least 40, probably more % of GNP. So there's plenty. If we stop taxing our earned incomes, which is our wages and the profits from our non-monopolized businesses, capital investment, say, look, if you want a war, if you want to have a military industrial complex, fine, but you must pay for it out of your unearned income. Those who are privileged, and the benefit for everybody would, oh, now I don't have to pay taxes on my wages. The tax on earned income is an absolute travesty.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to give all of the unearned income up.
Yeah.
In exchange
Henry
for
George,
when I work, let me keep what is properly mine, but make sure that the unearned
Right.
income goes to the
Mhm.
community where that creates it and deserves to have it.
Mhm.
I mean, that's the fundamental
yeah,
story
yeah,
that economic justice brings, and enough said.
yeah,
The unfortunate trajectory of that Henry George bestseller, I may recall the woman Lizzie Maggie, who read that book and it inspired her whole life. She filed 2 patents, developed a game that was supposed to teach
Monopoly.
his principles. What? Well, hers was not. It was the landlord's game. Stolen by Parker Brothers in 1935. The patent was stolen by Clarence Darrow. Then you have Ralph Ansbach, who develops the game. He's an economist at UC San Francisco who just died this year. And his game is anti-monopoly. And you may recall that he was sued by Hasbro for developing anti-monopoly. And he countersued, took the case all the way to the Supreme Court and won in 1983. And I had found it very interesting to follow Wikipedia, because Wikipedia, of course, is controlled by power players too, ultimately. And that story really minimizes what, the Supreme Court win that Ralph Ansbach had. And so the question is, I love your points, Wendell. How can we actually have a different story here?
It's well developed. It's already here.
Yeah,
but
no,
one has to focus on it.
Henry George was, he was very well known in his time. He gave many, many speeches, And it just goes to show you the power that these people have, especially in education, to stuff these solutions down. Okay, because a lot of times I'll be reading some book and then I'll see, well, somebody told about this corruption 50 years before and 50 years before that. And we do have a book called Counting Bounty that goes into that Henry George's idea and explores it even more, and basically ends up with we can end up with a UBI type situation, because right now the suicide rate among teenagers is like 20-some%. Okay, and that's because they do not want to see the future. They don't see themselves in the future.
Well, we have to.
There is
we-
no
we have
future for
something-
most people.
We have something to offer them. What we're talking about is something to offer the idea that there are human beings out there who want the kind of future that we think that we're thinking the kind of future they will want.
Yeah, and what made me really excited in my life was, wow, economic justice. That was 50 years ago. I haven't looked back even for a minute. I mean, I'm willing to be, for the ideas to be proven incorrect, but they have not been. And so when you put justice together with the possibility that it will give rise to peace, that's exciting.
Right.
Saying, well, we
I-
got to just to say that we got to end the military industrial complex. Of course, how do you do that? Well, I'm saying one of the ways that you could think about it and talk about it is if you have economic justice, that impacts that deeply. It also impacts the issue of the environment. The environment is being destroyed and abused for the purpose of pocketing unearned income. People, the elites own the body of our mother, our air, our water, our land, blah, blah, blah. And so we say, own all you want, pay us the rent, pay the community the
Right,
rent.
but
And
it changes the ability to exploit the situation, but we all know, I think Alana and I have exchanged notes on this, that when you're dealing with the legacy issues of the family and the legacy of Queen Elizabeth, okay, who was the largest landowner, and obviously her son, largest landowner in the world. And you sit there and you say, well, it's like the fix is very in and very real, but they've got the control, but we've got the numbers. And I think it's our job to get that message out, and all that you're talking about economic justice, but it's also how to do it. And I know, Alana, you mentioned that you might be willing to share some of the points that you brought up to me about the land and how that can be connected to the Alaska Permanent Fund, which is a very practical example of it actually happening on a state level. So it makes it seem like it's very doable.
Talking about suicide rates, and I just couldn't help thinking that one of the things that's missing is a connection to really young people who are very impressionable, who are getting poisoned for what is being given to them and how they're being taught to think about themselves. We can talk about ourselves as adults, but you have to be able to talk to young people who are from 10 to 20 years old. I feel as though they are not being guided, they are not being given information, and what it is you're talking about and the understanding you have of what it is that's created the desire in them to end their lives, they have to be addressed.
And I did make a mistake. It's not 20%. 20% of the teens have thought of suicide. Actually, the highest suicide rate is men over 75.
Okay, but a lot more young kids are thinking of it.
Right.
Yeah, I think that Marty.
Yes.
Most of my work has been with universities, and my whole thing is about bridging that students and professors can have liquid conversations. Governments and the military are to construct, however, the professors and students can come up with solutions. I've worked 30 years with the Peace Alliance and the campaign for the U.S. Department of Peace, so this has kind of been a long thing going with it. What's happening with the schools, I'll tell you just one example. the non-conflict studies at Berkeley, the students are all running it's probably just a video call like we're doing every Friday called Project Hope. I do believe the same thing. We need to bridge the younger people and let them know that, peace is profitable, everybody's sick of war. There are other ways to do this than to fight. And it's very obvious when you look at the television that, this land is never coming back for like generations and generations. It's just being destroyed. Everything's being destroyed in front of us.
For profit, for unearned profit.
For unearned profit, but just out of one thing, you might check out Project Hope for Berkeley. It's pretty interesting. I've been with the Peace Alliance probably 30 years, but it's one of the elders just retired and gave me a stack of books and movies. And one of the movies is called The Singing Revolution. We were all watching Hitler and everything that was going on, but the networks were really every once in a while, there'd be a little blimp on, what Stalin was doing with Estonia. And, they made him like not speak until finally one president said, okay, you can have freedom of speech. And they came out decades later singing their national anthem that they taught their children. Suddenly Russia said, well, maybe that wasn't a good idea, freedom of speech. And they sent the army tanks up there. This is a documentary. And the army tanks going up there and people are just singing their national anthem, and the tanks turned around and went. And that was the beginning of Russia falling apart. I don't know if you can get it on YouTube, but the Singing Revolution is pretty amazing to see because it's real. It's showing what we said on television about it.
And we want to have a music festival in Ireland.
Well, I'm
Please.
there. I'm already
Yeah.
trying to figure out how to book my ticket. I was at Woodstock. I'm here. I'm ready.
That's our goal.
That's my goal too.
Yeah.
Woodstock.
Nori.
Yeah, I just want to say that I think that the big thing that needs to happen is to make it fun. We got whatever
Amen.
we have to make it fun. That'll attract the young people. And basically, hey, I laid out sort of a set of goals and a goal and a set of rules that took me 10 years to write the rules because I'm slow and stupid, had to test every one of them and no one handed me tablets. But if you go to bestgame.org, you'll see kind of a prescription that I'm offering for declaring a positive thing into the future, and then just see who shows up to play and celebrate everyone who comes in, give them a place to speak, create all kinds of vehicles and projects that will support, more and more people joining and including maybe a new money system. Alana, bless her soul, set up a website for membership. And maybe you can post that link in the chat.
In the chat, yeah. Put that information in the chat.
We should put all of our links out there, really.
Yes.
So we
yes.
can all see what everybody's been doing forever.
Right, because we aren't the only people that want peace. Us
No.
11
Right.
people here.
Well, what I found when I was, basically research, I wrote a book called Butterfly that's become a global meme.
Mhm.
It's been picked up by Deepak Chopra and a whole lot of other people have used it over the years. And I basically go into it a bit in my TEDx talk, because what happens when a caterpillar turns into a butterfly, we're at the end, you talk about this being at the end of an old paradigm. We're at the end of the caterpillar era. And hey, guys, butterfly's coming. And there's some things we can do to make sure that the butterfly comes out in a healthy way. One thing that I mentioned in my TEDx talk is, you wonder why it's been so difficult for us? It's because there's a little phrase in my book Butterfly that says, an important secret: don't help the butterfly at this time that it's emerging from the chrysalis. Don't help the butterfly at this time. It needs this exercise to grow strong so that it can fly. So all of us have been, in a sense, in a pressure cooker, working really hard, not seeing, in some instances, not seeing a lot of results from what we're doing. And, it's tough, it's flogging. And the idea is that we can still celebrate each other's progress, basically look for the good in everything that we're doing and in the good in everything that other people are doing. I find that for talking with people who disagree with me,
best thing is just to keep my mouth shut in terms of my views, but to ask questions and to ask questions. And what I do is I create a space of just really loving them and making it a really safe space. And then I ask, the questions come to me. Okay, these are gifts from God, the infinite eternal one. And all I'm doing is being connected with the infinite eternal one. And that's my job in life. And to do whatever comes up, shows up for me to do. And sometimes that shows up in the most extraordinary ways. I mean, I did citizen diplomacy in the former Soviet Union in the 1980s and was very much part of the whole perestroika citizen diplomacy thing. I majored in Russian language and literature at Brown University, largely because when I was 9, my father was working at the Pentagon in arms control and disarmament, and I learned about the bomb. And I thought the adults are crazy. They're certainly hypocritical because they're telling us kids we should get along. And here they are with these things called bombs, and one bomb now could destroy a whole city like Washington, D.C., we were living in the country, so this was the closest city that I had an experience of. And I was terrified, and I mean, the story goes on, but I ended up majoring in Russian language and literature and dedicated about a decade to doing citizen diplomacy. I just recently corresponded 3 days ago, I mentioned this to Alana, with a dear Soviet friend who now is a Russian friend, who's one of 2 members of the Soviet Academy of Sciences ever, in Russia and in Russian and in Soviet history, to have 2 appointments on the National Academy of Sciences in 2 different disciplines. The other guy died some time back, but my friend is, very well placed. I wrote him about 3 days. It was right the day before the bombing of the bridge, to Crimea. And I said, Yosha, I think a third wave intervention is needed now. This is the day before the bombing of the bridge, okay? And then I just wrote him this morning and I said, what about a delegation of women? Because since Tulsi Gabbard has just come out basically saying about the Democratic Party being a party of warmongers, or whatever the phrasing was she used. And she hasn't, she was just on the Joe Rogan show. That was quite an interesting clip. And I wrote him and said, I have a dear friend who I think would be part of this women's delegation, Alana, that's you, and who has met Tulsi and maybe has an avenue to her. So, I think we just gonna have to make it up as we go along and just, do our best to make it fun, engaging, and involve everybody in as best we can and cheer people on. Some people have very few skills. Some people have a lot of skills, and let's just find a way that we can make the best possible use of everyone's skills and make it fun for everybody. Just, so anyway, that's my piece.
Well, that is terrific. I more than agree that, that everything has to be available, because people are going to come at different moments requiring different intellectual nutrients. Think of it that way. They're ready for different stages at different moments. So we have to, it's like a carnival that has to have, facilities that can handle many different tastes. You've got many different activities going on. And I do think, actually, Chris, this is kind of what we had talked about in our original discussion about this idea of a concert, that it would be for 3 days. This would be involving. So we're really thinking big. We just need that interim step to go from where we are now, to, actually activating it. But it is, I think, a step of finding the links of people. And I think the ideas that we just had delivered on the economic front, because that hits everybody personally. There, no matter what the war and peace may be too huge for some people to completely get their head around. But when you talk about economic justice, you can get your head around it. But what I would say is, I think it's also important to make sure people understand. I think Americans have been intentionally led to believe education has filled their heads with the idea that there is no difference between defense spending and spending on Main Street. There is a huge difference between defense spending and spending on Main, and that's been part of the con. to get people to go along with it who aren't necessarily involved in the war industry itself. They put, we know they put facilities across the country. So every state wants the war budget to go up so they get more and more money for their, for their state industry, things like that. So.
I think that contests are really great motivators. And I was imagining, really activating this Newgrange concert idea and asking for people to bring forth, for young people to write songs about peace, also about what it's like to be alive right now, about how they feel about the environment. There might be 5 categories of song, and start to get a contest going of kids. And it's like young people expressing, and have this Newgrange be a forum for these new voices to be able to do it through their music. Part of what would be what they get is they get to perform. There'd be a need for some kind of money to help these kids get to Newgrange and be able to do what they're doing. But I feel like you don't realize how it is. There's all this talent that wants to focus. And if they're given an opportunity, there's going to be, and it can happen on the internet in a way that gets it started, so that but there's a place where it can really happen in Newgrange, and the purpose. And so like it begins to be a way that some of these other ideas weave through in this activation of voices of young people to really express how they feel through music.
I'd like to read something
No,
here
I'm done.
from JFK's peace speech. What kind of peace do I mean? What kind of peace do we seek? Not a Pax Americana enforced by the world, on the world by American weapons of war. Not the peace of the grave or the security of the slave. I'm talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living, the kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and to build a better life for their children. Not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, but peace for all time.
Yes,
Yes,
Yep.
yes.
that's it.
That's it.
He
That's
said it. He
Yeah.
said it. That was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Onwards.
Onward.
That's a great name. That's a great name for the concert, Peace for All Time. That's a great name.
I like
That's
that.
a
like
great
that.
name.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I also feel like there may be a way of introducing this contest with those words of JFK.
Yeah.
And so that this is the purpose of it, and to help people I don't have it all in my head, but I'm just seeing the contest is like, it's almost like an Olympic, an Olympic thing, the Olympics. This is like a peace Olympic.
And if
I like that.
those are great words of introduction, I recognize my boss's words of farewell. He said onwards.
Wendell, nice meeting another cousin.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody,
Thank you so much.
for coming today.
Thank you.
We're
Thank you.
onward. We're onward.
We're onward.
Till next time.